So I'm really excited and honored to share the stage with this really outstanding group of people who have accomplished quite a bit and are still doing more. And I'd like to thank the Climate Group and World Green Building Council for bringing the focus on buildings to this conversation. For those of you who track things like side events at the COPs, COP21 was the first time we had a buildings day. And, I checked, and the previous 20 COPs were all held in buildings, but it was not a subject of any of the things that were being discussed. So WGBC took the lead and brought that conversation to the COP, and I think that their leadership and their continued focus on net zero energy is really raising the profile of all the things that are happening with our great panel. So in the morning kickoff, which was sort of a macro level policy discussion, it was 3 U.S. governors and the Premier of Quebec. California Governor Jerry Brown, he was a bit of a grump, to be honest, but he owned it, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning for him, and he's been such a great leader on all of these issues that he definitely gets a pass in my book. But what he basically said at the end of his wrap-up was, it's time to get to work, right? It's time to get to work doing the things we know how to do, but it's also time to get to work innovating on the things that we know that we need in order to be able to continue to push the progress that's happening. And that's why this panel really does excite me, because these are the folks that are actually doing the work. The governor of Washington coined their panel the We Can Coalition, and I'm going to coin you guys the You Are Coalition, right? So they were talking about we can do it. These are the folks who actually are doing it. So this is great. So we've got Erin here, who is on the leading edge of finance of a lot of these things for high performance projects. But Erin also brings the perspective of an owner who's internally focused on leading the charge to walk the walk. And then we've got Diane, whose organization sets a globally relevant and consistently high benchmark for performance of projects and make sure that they deliver for owners like Erin. And then we have 2 gentlemen, Jens and Harry, who make the things that make the buildings that Diane wants to make so that Erin can have them. Right, so we have a product manufacturer lens for the first time over the course of this day. And I mentioned that I really feel like this is an accomplished panel, and I know a bit about that. The work that I do at U.S. Green Building Council does relate to the technical development of all the rating systems that we have our fingers in, but particularly for the bulk of my career there, it's been related to the LEED rating system. And LEED is about setting those benchmarks. And collectively across this panel, we have more than 1,000 LEED projects represented in one way, shape, or form, whether from an owner perspective, from a design perspective, from a product manufacturing perspective. So, like I said, it's very accomplished, which is important, because I think we've gone through all the discussions about how we need these folks to be good at what they're best at. And I want to start by turning to Erin, because Jamie Dimon said something last week that absolutely crushed my Bitcoin holdings. That's not a question, I'm just want to get it out there. But he also said that the successor for his role as CEO is already inside JP Morgan.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
You want to share anything?
It's not me.
All right. You've got my vote, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about why you've got my vote. The commitments that you've made from a corporate perspective, the fact that you really are walking this walk. Walk us through that, please.
Great. Well, thank you, and thanks to the Climate Group for having us. And as the JP Morgan representative, I think I would be remiss if I didn't compliment the venue selection. So here we are at the Morgan Library. So thank you very much for that. I work in JP Morgan's Sustainable Finance Group, and I head up what we call capital strategies, which is a fancy way of saying, how do we integrate sustainability products and financial products for our clients into the various lines of business? And also, how do we think about our own corporate footprint, and how do we green that? So to that end, you may have seen in July, we actually made an announcement on each of these fronts. The first is we made a commitment to join the RE100, which we'll talk about a bit more tomorrow, but also to power the firm's operations with 100% renewable energy by 2020. And I'll talk a bit more about how we do that. I'll take that. And we also made a commitment to facilitate $200 billion of clean financing by 2025, which really speaks to how we are working through our client franchises to help facilitate our clients' sustainability initiatives. But I guess to turn first to our renewable energy commitment, we're accomplishing this through a few ways, with a priority on creating new projects that bring new renewable energy to the grids that we're purchasing power on. And so how are we actually doing that? The primary way we'll be doing this is through long-dated power purchase agreements from wind and solar farms. We've already executed one, the Buckthorn project in northern Texas, which we did last November, and it should be commercially operating by the end of the year. The second way we'll be doing this is through on-site renewable generation. So we have a very large retail footprint in the United States. You've seen our Chase branches everywhere. The blue glows around the country. And we'll be installing solar panels on a multitude of branches, up to 1,500. And so between these two initiatives, and actually I should say, we have a third initiative to reduce our energy consumption. And how are we doing that? Well, we've partnered with Current, powered by GE, and we've actually purchased 1.4 million LED light bulbs last year. There's a joke somewhere about how many JP Morgan employees it takes to install 1.4 million light bulbs, but I'll let you do the math.
Somebody can do that.
And also installing building management systems. So this is a long way of saying these three initiatives across our global footprint, which comprises over 75 million square feet across 60 countries and over 5,500 buildings, in itself I think is a market-moving initiative. When you marry that with our $200 billion commitment, that actually allows us to get more scale. And in the transaction that we did in Texas, where we're buying power from a wind farm, we actually worked with our commodities team in the investment bank to make sure that deal actually was able to get across the finish line. And the reason why that was important is our real estate team only had demand for about 50% of a 100 megawatt wind farm. Well, so who's going to buy the rest of it? Because you need a credit-worthy off-taker, someone who's going to buy the power that's produced in order for that wind farm, which is developed by Energy, to attract financing. And so our commodities team stepped up and purchased the remaining portion of the power. And that, I think, is a really neat way of demonstrating how a global financial institution can use both its very large footprint, coupled with its commercial acumen and expertise, in order to affect the financing of a large wind farm that will bring more renewable energy to the grids that we're operating on. And so that was an exciting transaction for us. Throughout the panel, I'm happy also to touch on anything related to increasing investor demand for sustainability products and how we're seeing our clients also put these types of transactions to work. But I'll stop there.
I feel like there's no end to the number of things that I want to hear you guys say out loud. So not to let the opportunity to talk with the rest of the folks go by, though, I'll go next with a joke. So a CEO, a physicist, and an economist walk into a bar. They say, "Hey Jens, how you doing?" Right? He's both the CEO and a physicist and an economist. Did not work. Maybe there's a translation problem. But Jens, I'd love it if you could talk about the work that Rockwool's doing on bringing the types of technologies and products to make the high performance that we need and out of the buildings, to give us the ability to reduce our energy use intensity, give us the ability to really achieve high performance across not just the new construction but also the renovation markets.
So first of all, I had a presentation deck to present this, and thanks to Jonathan Latsky and Minister Ballard, Updike, John Lee, all of that is covered. They did a really good job, I felt, to presenting what needs to be done. So I thought I'd take a little bit of a reflection on kind of the no-brainer arguments for why I came to the conclusion what needs to be done, with 3 simple conclusions. So I can start with taking the 200 billion from Erin and what to do with that, without thinking too much about the payback, but thinking more the environmental payback. So first of all, there are a lot of facts flying around in this area, but there are maybe 6 or 7 that I think are important to know. This is the physicist side of it. 1.5 million people move into cities every week. 1 billion new homes needed by 2025. Hurricanes, floodings, you name it. The need for resilient cities. In the developed world, 40% of all energy, and energy means CO2 with today's mix, consumed by buildings. 1/3 is the average. So it's the biggest individual chunk of energy consumption on Earth. Of the existing stock, we talk net zero, less than 1%. Less than 1% is net zero buildings, so we have leaky buildings. And we have a renovation rate of 1%. So those are 6 or 7 facts. And if you look at that, and we realize then that in the US and Europe, 40% of the energy is just leaking out of buildings. And I don't think we meet any Paris goals if we don't fix that. And if you then have a renovation rate of 1% with simple maths that is half wrong, it will take 100 years to renovate that and seal these buildings off so that they're still much more comfortable and better. So first conclusion, raising the renovation rate to 3% or 4% is a huge task, but I don't think you get out of it if you want to hit the target. And if you renovate, you get a lot of positive side effects. For example, energy poverty in Europe is 14%. We have more than 50 million people that can't afford to heat their buildings during winter in Europe. And all the effects that has on children, etc., all of that be solved also. And there are many, I'm sure Diane will speak about the positive things, but having an insulated, not leaky building. The second aspect is when you do you renovate or you do new buildings, net zero is the way to go. You should go long on that. And when you do it, we had the other fact that 1/3 of the waste of materials on Earth comes from the construction industry. So I think there are 2 conclusions. It's one conclusion, but first of all, you try to use materials that are recycled material as much as possible, and you try to go long. You try to use materials that last for 80, 100 years, and at the end of the cycle, because buildings, we live in them much longer than we think, they should be possible to recycle again. That's one. And then when we come to this with carbon zero, net zero, etc., if we bring it down to the physics, to understand it in a simple way, when a big company, they have a big headquarters and they buy carbon certificates somewhere, and then they net that out, that's still a leaky building. You need more solar panels, you need more everything to neutralize that. So for me, the purest form of improvement and the metric to track for all buildings is the kilowatt hour per surface per year. If you drive that one down, you have turned every building into heat storage. It can take intermittent energy supply, and that nuclear plant we build in this state, or that renewable, the wind farms, the solar, all the rest, you just need a fraction of it. That means less steel, less glass, less everything. So I think that kilowatt hour per, that density, if we could get that number into our head for our own buildings, for our friends' buildings, for our office, and we start to drive it, it will have a lot of positive effects.
There is a report that was put out, or is being put out either this week or next week, by WGBC that says that EUI, that energy intensity number, needs to go down by 80% by 2030 to reach the Paris goals. I think that really underscores exactly what you're saying, and I think that it's a nice lead into the way that Diane has been able to. I'm hoping she's able to talk about some of the commitments that Gensler as an organization has made to the 2030 challenge. Just by way of introduction, I have been an Art Gensler fanboy since my first day at USGBC, which is in 2002. And obviously Diane knows what a giant he is, but one of the things I think he's famous for saying, and I really like it, is that from the beginning, I've hired people who are smarter than me. So as co-CEO of Gensler, you have some literally big shoes to fill, but also you have some figuratively giant shoes to fill. And I'd love it if you could just share with our group today how you're doing that, what you're doing at a macro level, what you're doing at a city's level, what you're doing to meet the challenges that we face as an organization.
All right. Well, thank you, Brendan, and thank you for that incredible challenge to fill the shoes of Art Gensler. Okay, let's see.
You're showing my deck.
Okay, one moment. First of all, it is such an honor to be here and be part of this conversation today and this week. There probably is no more important conversation to be had than to discuss what is going on as it relates to climate and sustainability, and from my perspective, the things that we all can do and do more of. So just to talk a little bit about it, and in so much in agreement with Jens in terms of the perspective of the built environment. Buildings are responsible for 35% of energy consumption and greenhouse gases, and this represents an incredible opportunity. And if you think about that and think about, gee, what if that number were zero? The impact that we could have. And that's what we're focused on at Gensler. We're the largest architecture firm in the world. And last year alone, we designed 1 billion square feet of space, which is many commercial districts of many, many, many cities if you aggregated it all. So we recognize the incredible opportunity and the incredible leadership responsibility that we have in our industry as well. This is a project that we just recently finished for a great client in the financial services industry, and I would say that that sector actually really is stepping out and making huge commitments to what we all need to be doing in terms of sustainable buildings. This is probably, I guess it's considered the greenest building in the United States and one of the greenest buildings around the world. And in fact, the leadership of PNC toured buildings in Europe and all over the world to really see what were the most advanced technologies. They wanted to put that into their headquarters. And I think this speaks to the leadership of the private sector and the incredible partnership then with the public sector. But I think we're seeing the private sector actually stepping out with a commitment that is above and beyond what is required by any statute to really take the lead in this entire discussion and show how we can achieve these kinds of goals. Jens talked about this. Again, we all know that our buildings today are this 35% of emissions, but it is going to continue to grow unless we do something about it. With the growth of population, again, this is a chart showing the population in our cities. As we know, there's more people now, and literally we just crossed that line a couple of years ago, where there's more people now living in cities than in rural areas. And this is new for the planet, right? And then we're seeing that number continue to grow. There's 3.9 billion in cities today, and it's again, a number that is going to continue to go up. And that is where we're seeing some of the greatest challenges in terms of CO2. And again, when we talk about what we can do with our buildings, that's also where we're going to see the greatest impacts. We signed the Paris Agreement, the commitment. We're one of a handful of architecture firms that were there, and literally, again, feel this is so important for the building industry and the design part of that industry to really embrace that direction and frankly, take a look at our own practices and start to change how we create buildings. The AIA has the AIA 2030 Challenge. We are a part of that. And again, there's a goal there of being net zero in all the buildings that we design by 2030. So that is an important part of what our industry is doing and likewise what our firm is doing as well. This is an image of the cover of a report that we are literally launching today. In alignment with the launch of Climate Week, which is our self-reporting on the impact of the buildings that we designed last year. We made a commitment about a year ago that we were going to, on an annual basis, literally in a transparent way, report ourselves on what is going on with the portfolio that we are creating, the buildings that we are creating around the world. We work in 100 different countries. We do around 10,000 projects annually. So again, we know that our buildings and our projects matter and that we want to, make a difference in terms of this issue of climate and sustainability. And, we're really proud of the fact that, again, our projects in aggregate saved 11 million tons of CO2 last year, which is twice from 2 years before. So again, we are measuring and reporting and continuing to raise the bar to meet those 2030 challenges. Again, and the report is on Gensler.com, on our website. It's the first thing on the website you'll see. And, it has charts and facts like this that are helping you see of the 700 million square feet of buildings that we designed, where those buildings are in terms of CO2, and in terms of our interiors, the same thing. And then with project examples, because what we want to do, and with this report and other things that we're putting out, we want to help our clients understand what they can do and help, again, continue to raise the bar in terms of the work that we're doing. The project that is showing on the screen right now is our new New York office, which was designed with all of the kinds of technologies that are the state of the art in terms of mitigating energy issues as well as sensors to make sure that it is a smart design. And then one of the things we're really proud of in the report, and again, this goes back to making sure we're leading the conversation, is, what should we be doing collectively from the standpoint of our cities, our buildings, and our interiors? What are the kinds of things that are the sort of table stakes today, what we should be doing more of, and what is ahead in the future in terms of technologies in each of these areas. So I encourage each of you to join with us in continuing to raise the bar in terms of our buildings and what we're doing, and to continue with this conversation. We appreciate any feedback or thoughts you have on this report. Again, it launched today, but this is, again, one of the things that we are committed to is measurement. You're not going to know if you're doing better if you're not measuring. And so we're instituting a whole level of collecting metrics on every single project that we do, as well as learning about and helping the building materials industry to evolve, because we're not going to be able to create the buildings that reach the goals unless we have the materials and the systems to be able to achieve those goals. So again, it's a huge partnership across the board in the sector.
I appreciate that quite a bit, Diane. Thank you. And it's actually a perfect lead in for Harry, because one of the things that, crossing on my joke, because last one did not go. But so I'm going to go geek instead. And when I'm not doing the rating system development work at USGVC, I spend a fair amount of time doing codes development, which is if there's something that's less sexy than changing out chillers, which is one of the things the last panel talked about, it's codes development work. Take my word for that. And it's amazing over the course of the last decade to watch and have experienced how much of the gains have come from the lighting industry. There has been a sea change in the technology, and Philips has been at the vanguard of that with the innovations in solid state and in just a complete reinvention of the way we think about what we expect out of our buildings from a performance perspective. Because I know that Diane's team is delivering beautiful, human-centered design, but we have daylighting is a big part of that. We have two gentlemen who live in parts of the world where no amount of daylighting is going to solve their challenge for a good part of the year. But Harry, you're here to solve that challenge. So give us a rundown of what's going on from your perspective in the industry.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Brandon. It's good, to be with a coalition of the willing, all of us, because we really need that. And I was also, then preparing for this panel, a bit thinking about the question that was raised this morning and a little bit throughout the day. Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? I'm a concerned optimist. I'm an optimist because the direction we're moving is unstoppable. So clean technologies that are more economical, better on the quality of a living environment, but actually provide a better service for what actually they are needed. People don't buy light to save energy, they buy light for other reasons, as with many other technologies. But I'm concerned because we lack the speed that is needed. So what I wanted to do is briefly touch a little bit on the technology, what's happening there, the optimistic part. Then the concerning part, I think, has to do with let's say, what we need from our national governments. So subnational, pretty cool, all this happening. Also working in partnership with our national governments, not only here, but also in Europe. They're lagging behind. And then last little bit on some suggestions, how can we actually speed up and move to the scale of change that is needed. Indeed, if you look at the world of lighting, we talk about the LED lighting revolution. And I know, way back, at the end of 2003, I started this project. And it was, let's say, with business ambitions. I proposed internally, said I'll start a project to phase out inefficient lighting globally. And some people looked at it, and this was at the time that European Parliament was thinking about how to translate the Kyoto Treaty into regulation. So what has changed is now the Paris Agreement, same thing on the table. But then I felt instead of ducking, as many industries did, we need to engage with the European Commission and the like. We need to show how much we matter, and we need to show what should be done to make a difference. And that's what we did. So actually working with NGOs, with political leaders, and as a lighting sector, because all the lighting sector is moving in the same direction, so it's easier and much more fun to compete for the same future as to, let's say, an opposing vision on that. Mm-hmm. In December 2006, I think some of you know, well, I think all of you know in a way, then we felt, okay, who says A also has to say B. So that's when we made a call to phase out inefficient incandescent light bulbs globally. And we repeated that in March in Washington, because then news from Europe not always travels into US media. Well, then it did, I can tell you. But then at that time, you should imagine, 2/3 of our sales volume were incandescent light bulbs. We sold 0 LED. At that time, the incandescent light bulb was at a stable level, rock stable for years, 12 billion pieces a year, about 2 per capita worldwide. Well, today it's 3. So in 10 years, it has come down by 75%. Mm-hmm. And this shows that if you team up, which we did, and I think that goes for all technology that we work on, then a lot of change is possible. And we should never become desperate by some laggards who still don't believe that action is needed and very beneficial. But also today, last quarter, 70% of our turnover was LED in value. So 10 years, nothing. It's a faster change than laptop computers, smartphones, that anything that the world has ever seen. So it's fun to work at Philips Lighting, I can tell you that. Then the second part, and also maybe there are a few project examples. Earlier today it was mentioned that the Empire State Building will turn green later this week. Well, that's done with our LED lighting, and not only with the Empire State Building, you can do lots of great things, but it also saves 70% of energy compared to the old lighting technology. And there are many more examples, maybe later on we can mention a few more. So why am I concerned? Particularly because the real understanding of what needs to be done and of the fact that change is actually innovation, is progress, is giving people what they need, is connecting a lot of concerns, economy, jobs, and so forth, has not really landed with a lot of national political leaders. And let's say I bend my mind to break my mindset every day on understanding why this is, because the logic fits in a nutshell. And also as the chairman of the European Alliance to Save Energy, spend a lot of time on this. But maybe a few numbers. We all know that the improvement rate of energy efficiency is only 1.5% per year. So we need to at least double that, which is why we're here, because it's mostly renovating existing infrastructure and buildings that need to do that. In Europe, as well as here, that's the rate. Today, later this year, the Energy Efficiency Directive, so energy efficiency as well as for buildings, are being revised. And maybe a little insight into how democracy works in Europe is that science, IPCC and IEA, they tell us, well, efficiency needs to do like between half to 2/3 of the job of creating sustainable development pathways, staying under 2 degrees centigrade. Then you should do something like 45% in 2030. Well, European Parliament, a few weeks ago, for the second time in 2 years, our only elected body at European level for 40% in 2030. So that's pretty good. Then we have European Commission. So let's say our ministers, our secretaries of anything, and they said, whoa, that's really a lot. Maybe we should do 30. Then we have our European Council, which are the heads of state. And they said, well, initially they said, whoa, this is a lot. And the horse trading started, as quite often happens, and they had a very, let's say, position to stay with 25%. And with a lot of pulling and shoving, and together with many companies that are here, we succeeded in getting that to 27%. Well, I was last week in Strasbourg, where also the European Parliament resides a day a week, and I said, well, this is actually a complete non-target. It's not by doing more or less, but it's by going forward, more than 35% in 2030, because 2020 we are at 20, if you can still follow the math. So 1.5% per year, 35 is business as usual. Then actually, 27 is going backward. It would halve the renovation rates. So maybe then I would say, want to say one thing there. If you look at when we were young at school, or our children, then you got fixed milestones and timelines. And we all know it's good. We knew when our parents were chasing us, and we know when we are chasing our kids, do your homework, because then you qualify for the next level. So I think it's also high time that as adults, we stick to the required ambition level and the required timeline that is needed. So that brings me to the last point, so how to move forward. Just two quick remarks. One is simple. Don't only talk about what others should do, but walk the talk. So as a company, we will become carbon neutral in 2020, which we announced at COP21. So maybe part of the buildings work should also be that probably first subnational governments, and then national governments will also say, well, by that year, we don't know yet how, it's difficult maybe, but we will do it. That's when we will become carbon neutral in the building stock. And so really setting an ambition level and a timeline. And the last thing that I want to add there is that you hear a lot of talk about this difficult, there are people in the building. Well, one insight that I find something like a golden nugget is what I learned from Edward Masrier from Architecture 2030, because he said, he found and his team, that when you take the moment of ownership or tenancy change, residential, public and private sector buildings, you use that for a deep renovation, so with some carrots and sticks, that's just enough to double those renovation rates to what is needed and why we're all here today.
Thank you. I want to come back to that theme of existing buildings and renovation of our existing building stock, because I do agree with a lot of things that Jens teed up in terms of the way that our existing buildings are performing. They're not living up to the challenges that they've got. So there's a whole bunch of knotty issues that are sort of intertwined. There's a finance question, certainly. There's an expectation setting question. There's a technology question that's in there. I'd like to start, Jens, if you could, to just sort of get your sense of what the scale and the capacity of the manufacturing community is to respond to the challenge that we have to address the existing building stock.
I think the bottleneck to some extent will be on manufacturing, but that's not the main bottleneck. I think if you look at the construction industry over the last 50 years, you see that kind of BIM design and the CAD drawings, that is advancing. But when you come to the site, you have a competition between new build and renovation. And renovation today is done as it always was done. So when you build a lot of new houses, that takes blue-collar people from the renovation, and you are stuck. So the constraint is very much on renovation, and it gets even worse when you get into the cities because it's congested, it's difficult to be there with all the materials. So I think that over the coming years, some people will, in the same way as you modularize certain pieces of a house, you modularize the design elements, you probably could do that also with renovation. And we need smart people like Gensler to think about how you do that and take on those both architectural project for design, but also for the function and rationalize it.
That's great, and I think that, my previous life I worked for a performance contractor, so one of the things, lighting was always our bread and butter for investing in energy efficiency to amortize it against other investments, deeper, longer payback items, and I guess, Erin, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the types of financial mechanisms that are out there that enable this type of scaling. If we can get the manufacturing challenge and the workforce challenge cracked, are we going to have the money to be able to do it?
Yeah, I think the money is certainly there. Broad comment, as the investor community, I think, develops a greater interest in green products, it's up for the financial services industry to develop products that make it easier for them to tag investments as green or qualifying toward their greener portfolios. I think one good example of that is green bonds, which allow corporations to issue debt that has a qualifying use of proceeds according to the green bond principles. It's a voluntary reporting, but that alone, I think, has facilitated the investor community's interest in buying green products. They're communicating to their asset managers and asset owners are communicating that this is the type of thing that they want to see more of, and certainly I think for the JP Morgans of the world, that's where we can step up and make it easier for the investor community to demonstrate those investment desires through financial products.
That's great. We're running, I knew we were going to run low on time. I want to take a little bit of a different tack because I think one of the things that was said earlier this morning by Catherine McKenna, who's the Minister of Environment and Climate for Canada, she said, you're not going to get things done if you leave people behind. And one of the things that I've always found so great about the work that Gensler does is that when you walk into the spaces that you do, your offices and the spaces that you do for your clients, there's such a sense of an understanding of the place and an understanding that these spaces that you are creating are being created for a purpose, right? And that purpose is to nurture and promote wellness and to drive productivity. And I think in terms of the way that we tend to have, over the course of this conversation and the course of this day, have focused on the challenge, I want to make sure we don't lose the humanity in the conversation, because I think that we can fix the problem by turning off all the outside air dampers, right, and getting those leaky buildings just to recycle all their air, creates a different set of challenges, right? Because going back to my performance contracting days, that's one of the things we did. And it's not a great strategy, but you guys don't do that. And I'd like you to just sort of share how you can marry these two agendas together, because it is an important thing that we don't lose the thread of why we're doing this work and who we're doing it for.
Yeah, Brendan, great point. At the core, it's about people. And we're creating places that are going to enhance people's experience, their health, their well-being, their performance, and we all believe that this is the virtuous cycle. And I love what Erin was saying, because where she was going is that there's starting to be some real market drivers that people want, and markets want, and investors want green buildings, or buildings that really are this kind of product. And it's even, frankly, driving the renovations of existing buildings in fairly significant ways in our cities. And I think this is the other piece. I kind of liken it to the electric car. There was the Prius, which was maybe a little bit more about, your philosophy and your sort of, beliefs. But then there was really, Tesla, and that really had much more to do with experience and something people wanted. And now you're seeing the entire car industry, the dominoes are just falling now, that it is the market demand is really starting to take over for the electric car. And I think we're seeing that, or I think we're beginning to be at that place where it's not necessarily just the community of believers. It really is the market itself. People want buildings that are healthy, that have that kind of experience. If you're in a building where there is fresh air coming in, it is a totally different experience than a hermetically sealed, sick building. And, again, it leads to all the kinds of outcomes from the standpoint of our kids being educated, to how we work, to how we shop, to how we play. It's better. And, so at the end of the day, there's just, I think we're on that tipping point. We're already seeing in many of the cities studies that are saying that, buildings that are LEED, gold and silver and platinum actually are getting better rents, and that they're in higher demand than like-kind product, even in similar locations. And so there's starting to be all of these factors, from the markets themselves to frankly, a lot of our clients, we talk to them, and it's about the war for talent. They are looking for talent to join their organizations, and the people that they are looking for are people who are saying, we want to work in a healthy environment, in a building that's sustainable, and fresh air, intake, they don't necessarily know the percentage, but that buildings that are healthy and where there's a sense of wellness. So there really is starting, again, I'm in that optimist space, seriously. I do think we're going to crack this. I do think we're on that tipping point. And frankly, it's because of having the great materials and light bulbs that are affordable, that are, able to deliver at a whole different level. Again, PVs, they're a tenth of what they used to cost. All of the materials industry, the systems side of it, but more than anything now, the markets are really starting to demand it.
Thank you. I certainly do not want to leave it there, but I have positioned my glass in front of the red blinky light for as long as I think is fair. I think it's a great place to end in some ways, because I think the reality is that the solutions that we're looking for are brought about by the convergence of all of these focuses, right? It's about climate change, for reducing the amount of climate change because of the impacts that it's going to have on people, and the disproportionate effects that the changing climate has on people who are already disadvantaged in one way or another. So making sure that we're bringing that to the table is and delivering on all of those goals across the outcomes that we're searching for is critical. So thanks for sharing that. I do want to thank the rest of the panel. I wish we had more time to talk. Perhaps we can do that over a beer later, which I know that we're in the middle of, you guys and that. So thanks very much. Let's give these guys a hand. Thank you.
Thank you.